The stars outside the arena station were completely still. Not a single ship moved. Not a single weapon fired. For the first time in 3 years of war, both sides had agreed to stop. Just for one day. Just long enough for two champions to walk into a ring and decide the fate of billions. The station floated in neutral space, between the Terran Coalition's fleet and the massive warships of the Galactic sovereignty. It was an old structure, built centuries ago by a now extinct civilization that had believed in something simple. That words deserved a chance before weapons. Nobody used it much anymore. Most wars ended with fire, not conversation. Today, both sides had agreed to follow an ancient tradition called the Duel of Declarations. The rules were simple. 2 champions enter the arena. Whatever the outcome of the fight, both sides must honor it. The duel decided everything. It was a strange system. There was something about it that even the most violent species respected. The idea that before blood was spilled, truth deserved a moment to speak. The Galactic sovereignty had chosen their champion without any debate. She entered the arena first. The crowd of alien observers, ambassadors, generals, diplomats from 17 different species, all went quiet the moment she walked in. She was impossible to ignore. 7 feet tall, with 4 powerful arms, each one carrying a different weapon. Her body was covered in natural silver plating, the kind that grew from her species' skin over a lifetime of combat. Her eyes were deep gold, and they had seen things most living creatures could not imagine. She had fought in 11 wars. She had won every single one of them. The Kethari, her species, were considered the greatest warriors in the known galaxy. They were not cruel by nature. They were simply built for conflict in a way that no other species could match. Stronger, faster, more resilient. Their culture valued honor above everything else. She stood in the center of the arena and waited. Her posture was straight. Her expression was unreadable. She had done this before. Stood in arenas, faced champions, and walked out the last one standing. This was no different to her. At least, that was what she told herself. Then the human walked in. The reaction from the crowd was hard to describe. It was not laughter. It was not exactly silence either. It was something closer to confusion. The kind that comes when reality does not match expectation. Captain Dara Ose was, by any alien standard, unremarkable. She stood at average human height, which meant she barely reached Vila's chest. She had 2 arms, both empty. No physical modifications of any kind. She was wearing a simple military uniform, dark navy, with small gold markings on the shoulder that indicated her rank. Her skin was dark brown. Her hair was cut short and practical. She walked with a steady, even pace, not fast, not slow, like someone who had made peace with wherever she was going. In one hand, she held a small, worn data chip, the kind of thing someone carries not because it is valuable, but because it means something. That was the Terran Coalition's champion. Several of the alien observers exchanged glances. One of the sovereignty generals leaned over and whispered something to the ambassador beside him. The ambassador did not respond. He was watching the human walk across the arena floor with an expression that was difficult to. Vila watched her approach. She studied her the way a warrior studies every opponent. Looking for strength, looking for threat, looking for the thing that made this creature worth sending into an arena. She found nothing obvious. No enhanced muscle structure. No weapon she could detect. What she did notice, however, was the eyes. Dara Ose's eyes were calm. It was a different kind of calm, entirely. The kind that only comes from a person who understands exactly what they are facing and has already decided, somewhere deep inside, that they are going to see it through regardless. Viola had seen that look once before, a long time ago. She filed that thought away and said nothing. The 2 champions stood facing each other. The arena's overhead lights were bright and white. The crowd was completely silent now. Even the sound of the ventilation system seemed to disappear. Viola spoke first, as was tradition for the sovereignty's champion. "You are smaller than I expected," she said. Her translator unit delivered the words in clean, flat English. "Before we fight, do you have anything to say, human?" Dara looked up at her. She did not look nervous. She did not look angry. She almost looked like she had been waiting for exactly this question. Actually, Dara said quietly, before we fight, I would like to tell you who humans really are. The arena stayed silent. Something invisible and impossible to name, like the moment before weather changes, when the air holds still just a second too long, and every living creature nearby feels, without knowing why, that something significant is about to happen. Viola studied the small human before her for a long moment. Then she nodded once. She walked slowly to the center of the arena, where a small circular platform sat embedded in the floor. She knelt down and pressed the old data chip into the slot on its surface. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the entire arena changed. The white overhead lights dimmed. The ceiling, which had been plain and gray just a second ago, came alive with light. Holographic images spread across it like a sky opening up. Then a single planet. Blue, green, wrapped in white clouds, turning slowly in the dark. The alien observers looked up. Some of them had seen images of the human homeworld before, alone in the middle of so much darkness. Viola did not look up at the planet. She kept her gold eyes on Dara. Dara stood beneath the image of her world and began to speak. I am not going to start with our greatest moments, she said. Her voice was steady and clear, carrying easily through the silent arena. I'm going to start with the worst ones, because that is the only way any of this makes sense. The image of Earth shifted. The blue and green faded. What replaced it was not beautiful. A frozen version of Earth filled the ceiling. Glaciers covering entire continents. Oceans locked under thick white sheets. The land bare and gray beneath a cold sky. The temperature data appeared alongside it. Numbers that made several alien observers shift uncomfortably in their seats. Roughly 100,000 years ago, Dara said, the human population of Earth dropped to somewhere between 1,000 and 10,000, fitting in a single small settlement by today's standards. She let that number sit in the air for one bad season could have ended us completely, one harsh winter on top of an already brutal world. The image changed again, then fire spreading across dry land, then a massive dark cloud filling the sky. The aftermath of a supervolcanic eruption that had, according to the data displayed, nearly ended all complex life on the planet's surface. Earth did not make things easy, Dara continued. It was not a gentle world. It did not protect its creatures. It tested them constantly, without mercy and without reason. Other species in this galaxy evolved in stable environments, or were guided and helped by older civilizations. Humans had neither of those things. We had a difficult planet, a small population, and no one coming to help. Vela's expression had not changed. She did not appear to notice she had done it. The images kept coming. Wars appeared on the ceiling next. Not wars against alien invaders. Centuries of them. Fought over land, over resources, over beliefs, over differences in culture that, viewed from the outside, seemed almost impossibly small. Cities reduced to ruins. Farmland turned into wasteland. Generations of people born into conflict they had no part in starting. Some of the alien observers looked away, not because they were unfamiliar with war. Most of them had seen war in their own histories. They looked away because of the scale, because of the consistency, because humans had done this to themselves. Repeatedly, across their entire recorded history. We hurt each other, Dara said simply. No shame in her voice. Just honesty, clean and direct. For a very long time, and in very serious ways, humans were one of the greatest threats to humans. Our own scientists calculated that we came close to complete self-destruction at least 47. 47 moments in history where the wrong decision, the wrong leader, the wrong chain of events could have ended everything. She paused, and every single time, we did not end. The ceiling shifted again. The ruined cities began to rebuild. Slowly at first, then faster, then lights, thousands of them, spreading across the dark surface of the planet like a slow fire catching. After every collapse, Dara said, we rebuilt. After every war, we made agreements, not agreements that always held. We kept coming back to the table. We kept deciding, generation after generation, that it was worth trying again. She looked up at the image above her for just a moment, then back at Vila. No outside force saved us. No advanced civilization reached down and pulled us out of our worst moments. Every time we fell, we got back up on our own. Every time we broke something, we tried to fix it with our own hands. The arena was completely still. Viela stood exactly as she had stood since the beginning. Straight, composed, weapons at her sides. The kind of change that only someone trained to read opponents would notice. She was no longer looking at Dara the way she had looked at her when she walked in. She was not looking at her like a small, unremarkable creature anymore. She was looking at her the way a warrior looks at something they are trying to fully understand. She said nothing about it. The images on the ceiling changed one final time for this part of the story. What appeared now was not destruction. It was not war or ice or fire. It was a single image. Simple, almost plain by comparison to everything that had come before it. A human hand, reaching down into dark water, pulling another human hand up toward the surface. We should have disappeared 100,000 years ago, Dara said quietly. By every logical model, by every survival calculation your researchers have run on us, we should not be here. We should have been one of the thousands of species that rose briefly on their world and then vanished without leaving anything behind. She looked directly at Vila. But we are here, standing in front of you, after everything. The hand on the ceiling held on. The arena stayed silent. Champion of the Cathari people said absolutely nothing, because for the first time in a very long time, she did not have anything to say. The arena was still quiet. The image of the two hands, one reaching down, one reaching up, stayed on the ceiling for a moment longer. Then it faded slowly, like the last light of a setting sun. The ceiling returned to a soft, dim glow, waiting for whatever came next. Dara Osei stood in the center of the arena floor and looked out at the crowd of alien observers. Diplomats from 17 different species, all watching from their elevated seats with expressions that ranged from confused to deeply. She had shown them the hard parts. The moments humanity had nearly destroyed itself completely. Now she was going to show them something that, in many ways, was even harder to explain. She touched the data chip controls again. Everything I showed you in the last section, she said, makes a certain kind of sense. Survival against hard conditions. Species across the galaxy have versions of that story. It is painful, but it is understandable. She looked around the room slowly. What I'm going to show you now does not make sense. Not by any model your scientists use. Not by any logic your researchers have applied to us. These are the behaviors that, when the galactic sovereignty's own analysts studied humanity, they flagged as, and I am using their exact words here, biological anomalies. A quiet murmur moved through the alien observers. Several of them straightened in their seats. The ceiling filled with a new image. It showed a burning building, thick black smoke pouring from the upper floors. The structure was clearly dangerous. Unstable, hot, actively collapsing in sections. The data beside the image showed atmospheric toxicity levels, temperature readings. Every number in the display pointed to one clear conclusion. Any creature entering that building was placing itself in serious danger. 3 humans were running toward it, not away from it. They disappeared into the smoke. 2 minutes passed on the timestamp. Then they came back out, carrying 2 other humans who could not walk on their own. These 3 individuals, Dara said, had no special equipment, no guarantee they would survive. They had no family connection to the people they saved. They did not know them personally. They had never met them before that day. She let that sit for a moment. They went in anyway. The image changed. A different scene now. A small boat on rough ocean water in the middle of a dark night. A single human in the water, far from shore, struggling. Another human jumped from the boat without hesitation. The water temperature data on the display showed conditions that were seriously dangerous for. The human in the water swam toward the struggling figure anyway, reached them, and pulled them back toward the boat. The individual who jumped, Dara continued, did not know how to swim particularly well. The water was cold enough to cause physical damage within minutes. They jumped anyway. Another image. A medical worker in full protective gear, entering a facility marked with warning signs in multiple languages. The data tag identified the location as an active outbreak zone, a place where a serious disease was spreading and the risk of exposure was extremely high. The medical worker was not from the country where the outbreak was happening. They had traveled there voluntarily. They were not required to go. No authority had ordered them. They had simply heard that people needed help, and they had come. Across human history, Dara said, walking slowly as she spoke. This pattern appears thousands of times, hundreds of thousands of times. Humans placing themselves in serious danger, not for family, not for their own community, not for any reward, but for complete strangers, people they had never met and would likely never see again. She stopped walking. By every evolutionary model used in this galaxy, this behavior should not exist. It does not improve the individual's survival. It does not directly benefit their family line. It carries significant personal risk. It is, by purely logical standards, irrational. She looked up at the alien observers. And yet, it is one of the most consistent threads in all of human history. The murmuring in the crowd grew a little louder. One of the ambassadors leaned forward in their seat. A sovereignty general was whispering something to an aide beside them. The aide was not responding. The aide was watching the ceiling. Viella had not moved. She was not studying Dara the way a warrior studies an opponent anymore. She was studying her the way someone studies a question they cannot find the answer to. Dara touched the controls again, softer ones this time. Humans sitting with elderly strangers in care facilities, holding their hands, simply keeping them company. Humans building shelters for animals that had no practical value to them. Creatures they would never eat, never use for work, never benefit from in any measurable way. Humans adopting children from other countries, from other cultures, children with no biological connection to them whatsoever, and raising them with the same love they would give their own. We grieve for strangers, Dara said, when something terrible happens on the other side of our planet, to people we have never met, in places we have never been. We feel it, not as social obligation. We feel it because something inside us does not seem to recognize the difference between our people and other people as clearly as logic says it should. She pulled up one more image. It showed the aftermath of a war. Rubble, damaged streets, a city that had been through something very hard. Some of them were from the side that had won the conflict. They were building something. Beside them, working with the same tools, were humans from the side that had lost. In the same ruined street, we have built hospitals for our enemies, Dara said quietly. We have sent food to people who, months before, were trying to harm us. We have sat across tables from people we fought against and worked out agreements, not because we forgot what happened, but because something in us kept insisting that it was worth trying to move forward. She turned and looked directly at Vila. Your analysts called these behaviors irrational, inefficient. They wrote in their reports that human emotional responses were a weakness in our species' design, a flaw that more evolved civilizations had moved past. Dara's voice stayed completely calm. I would like to suggest that they were wrong. The ceiling above the arena was filled with image after image of these moments. The reaching, the helping, the building, the coming back together after terrible things, stacked quietly on top of each other like pages in a book that had no final chapter. Viella looked up at the ceiling for the first time since Dara had begun speaking. She looked at it for a long moment. Her 4 arms, which had always been near her weapons as a matter of pure habit, a reflex built over decades of combat, were now simply at her sides. She had not noticed that either. You're telling me, Vila said slowly, her voice careful and measured, that your species does these things not because it is logical, but simply because it feels correct to you. Dara nodded once. Viela was quiet for several seconds. That is, she began, and then stopped. We have a word for a warrior who continues fighting past the point where logic says to stop, who holds a position not because strategy demands it, But because something deeper than strategy demands it, she paused. We consider it the highest form of strength we have a name for. Dara looked up at her and said, "You are telling me," Viola said very quietly now, "that your entire species operates that way. Not just your warriors. All of you. All of us," Dara confirmed. On our best days. The arena was completely silent. Above them both, a human hand was still reaching toward another in the soft light of the display, and every alien observer in the room was watching it without saying a single word. The soft images on the ceiling faded. The people building together in ruined streets. All of it dimmed slowly until the ceiling was dark again, and the arena felt quieter than it had at any point since the two champions had walked in. Dara Ose stood in the center of the floor and was still for a moment. The alien observers in the elevated seats above her had shifted during Part 3, not physically. Most of them had barely moved from their positions. The energy was different. When Dara had first walked into the arena, small and unremarkable and carrying nothing but an old data chip, most of the observers had looked at her with something close to indifference. She was the human, the one who was almost certainly going to lose the duel. They were not looking at her that way anymore. Viola was watching her from across the arena floor with an expression that was extremely difficult. The Kithari commander had said very little since Dara began speaking. That itself was unusual. Viola Sorvin was known, even among her enemies, as someone who always had something to say. Words were weapons to her, as much as the four she carried on her body. She used them with precision and confidence. Right now she was using none of them. Dara touched the data chip controls one more time. "Everything I have shown you so far," she said, her voice clear and steady, "is about who humans are in ordinary circumstances, how we rebuild." She looked around the room. "Now I am going to show you what happens when we are pushed past our limit." The ceiling changed. What appeared was not dramatic at first. It was a historical record. Text and numbers and timestamps, the kind of dry military data that analysts produce after a conflict. The first case study was from early human history. A small group of soldiers, outnumbered significantly, cut off from any support, without proper supplies, had held a defensive position for an extended period of time against a... The numbers on the ceiling showed the comparison clearly. By every military calculation, they should have fallen within days. They held for weeks. The soldiers who came to relieve them, Dara said, reported that the group did not look like people who had been through what the records said they looked worn down completely, still functioning as a unit. She moved to the next case, working alone in an isolated facility for years on a medical problem that the broader scientific community had decided was unsolvable, told repeatedly by people more qualified and more experienced that the work was pointless. The researcher continued anyway, not with any great dramatic moment of inspiration, just steadily, day after day, year after year, refusing to accept that the answer did not exist, after everyone else had moved on. Your analysts, Dara said, flagged this as an outlier, an exceptional individual, a rare case. She shook her head slightly. It is not rare. We have thousands of documented examples that follow this exact pattern. Humans continuing to work on problems long after the logical stopping point has passed. Not because they have more information than everyone else, not because they have special abilities, simply because something inside them will not accept that it is finished. The ceiling filled with, not one at a time, many at once, a wide display of records, each one telling a version of the same story. Humans in extreme conditions, physical, mental, emotional, reaching a point where every biological signal, every rational thought, every reasonable voice around them said stop. Ordinary people in impossible situations who had no special training, no extraordinary background, nothing that should have made them capable of what they did. Your researchers gave this a name, Dara said. In their internal reports about humanity, they called it the recovery anomaly. The unexplained tendency of human individuals to resume function after reaching apparent capacity. We call it something simpler. She looked at the ceiling for a moment. We call it a second wind. One of the alien ambassadors in the upper seats made a quiet sound. Just a sound. The kind that escapes without permission when something lands in a way you were not. Viola's jaw tightened slightly, a small movement that most observers would have missed entirely. Dara did not miss it. She touched the controls again. "And now," Dara said, "I want to show you something that I obtained recently, something that took considerable effort to access." The ceiling cleared. Everything that had been displayed before disappeared. In its place, a single document appeared, formal, written in the precise, structured language of official sovereignty military reporting. The heading at the top identified it clearly. It was a Galactic Sovereignty Internal Assessment, produced by their own military research division after 3 years of studying humanity in preparation for the current conflict. The alien observers went very still. Some of them recognized the document format immediately. Viola recognized it immediately. Dara did not look at her. She let the document speak for itself. She highlighted a single section near the bottom of the report. The words expanded across the ceiling, large enough for every observer in the arena to read clearly. It said, in the sovereignty's own formal language, translated into every dialect present in the room. Recommendation: do not engage humanity in extended conflict. Standard attrition models do not apply. Human forces do not process sustained pressure the way other species do. Where other species experience declining function under prolonged stress, human units have been repeatedly observed to stabilize, adapt, and in several documented cases. Furthermore, human command structures demonstrate unusual resilience. The removal of leadership does not produce expected levels of organizational collapse. Individual humans appear capable of assuming coordination roles spontaneously, without formal designation. The last line of the highlighted section read, "In summary, humanity treats defeat as a temporary condition. We have no reliable model for predicting when or whether they stop." The arena was absolutely silent. The deep, genuine silence of a room full of people who had just read something that changed the shape of what they were looking at. Several of the alien observers were exchanging glances with each other. The Sovereignty General, who had been whispering to his aide earlier, was now simply staring at the aide beside him had stopped writing entirely. Dara finally turned and looked at Viola directly. "You already knew this," she said, not as an accusation. "Just as a fact stated plainly. Your own people wrote it. Your own researchers studied us for 3 years and put it in a formal document and sent it to your commanders." She took one slow step forward. "And you came anyway." Viola met her eyes. She did not look away. Her voice was low and even. Viola was quiet for a moment, the kind that feels different from ordinary silence, heavier, more deliberate. "Because retreat based on fear is not something the Cathari do," she said finally. "Even when the fear is reasonable." Dara looked at her for a long moment. Then, very quietly, she said, "Commander Sorvin, do you understand what you just told me?" Vela blinked once. "You continued forward," Dara said gently, "past the logical stopping point. Against the recommendation of your own analysts, not because you had more information than them, not because you had a strategic advantage they had missed." She tilted her head slightly. "Simply because something inside you would not accept stopping." The silence that followed was above them both, the Sovereignty's own words still glowed on the ceiling. Quiet, formal, stood completely still as the full weight of what had just been said settled over her like the first snow of a long winter. The document on the ceiling faded. The arena returned to its plain, white light. No more history filling the air above 2 champions standing in the middle of a room that the whole galaxy was watching. Just the arena floor. Dara Ose reached down and removed the data chip from the platform slot. She held it in her hand for a moment, then closed her fingers around it quietly and stepped back to her starting position. The worn little chip that had carried the entire story of humanity through an alien arena now sat in her palm like something ordinary, like something that did not just change the atmosphere of an entire room. She slipped it back into her uniform pocket. Across the floor, Vela Sorvin had not moved. She was still standing exactly where she had been standing since the beginning, 4 arms at her sides. Her gold eyes were fixed on Dara with an expression that had traveled a long distance during it had started as indifference, passed through something that looked almost like discomfort. Something that looked, if anyone in the arena was reading it correctly, like deep and genuine respect. The official timekeeper at the edge of the arena spoke. His voice was flat and procedural. The voice of someone whose job was to move things forward regardless of atmosphere. "The declaration period has concluded," he announced. "The champions will now move to their marks. The duel of declarations will begin on the signal." The crowd above stirred. The spell of the last hour broke slightly. People shifted in their seats. Ambassadors picked up their recording devices. The practical reality of what was about to happen pushed its way back into the room. 2 champions were about to fight, and the outcome would decide the fate of billions of people waiting in ships on both sides of the... Dara walked to her mark. A small circle on the floor, painted in the colors of the Terran coalition. She stood inside it and faced forward. Her hands were loose at her sides. Her breathing was steady and controlled. The slight tremor that had been in her hands earlier, barely visible, but there, was still present. She had not managed to make it disappear entirely. She had not tried to hide it either. Viola walked to her mark. 4 weapons came forward, not aggressively, not yet, but into a ready position. The natural silver plating across her body caught the arena light. She was, objectively, an extraordinary physical presence. Every alien observer in the room knew what she was capable of. Every military analyst watching the broadcast knew what the numbers said about this matchup. The numbers were not kind to the human. The signal device on the timekeeper's podium began its countdown. Viola looked across the floor at Dara. Dara looked back at her. Viola's eyes moved to Dara's hands. She saw the tremor. She had seen it from the beginning, actually. A warrior noticed these things automatically, without deciding to. The tremor told her that the human was afraid, had been afraid this entire time, through every word of every part of the story she had told, through every image on the ceiling, through every moment of standing in an arena in front of the greatest warrior in the known galaxy, with nothing but a data chip and a calm expression. She had been afraid the whole time. Something moved in Viola's chest. It was not a feeling she experienced often. In 11 wars, against hundreds of opponents, she had felt many things before a fight. Occasionally, against very worthy opponents, something close to excitement. What she felt right now was different from all of those. It was the feeling of looking at something and understanding it completely for the first time. She thought about the document on the ceiling, her own people's words. Humanity treats defeat as a temporary condition. She thought about the burning building with 3 humans running toward it. She thought about the researcher working alone for years on a problem everyone else had abandoned. She thought about what Dara had said. Simply because something inside them would not accept. She thought about what she herself had said, without fully realizing what she was admitting. Because retreat based on fear is not something the Cathari do, even when the fear is reasonable. Viola made a decision. It was not a strategic decision. It was not a political one. It was not based on any calculation or military advantage or logical outcome assessment. It came from somewhere deeper than all of those things. The same place, she realized, that had always driven her through 11 wars and every arena she had ever stood in. The same place Dara Osi had been talking about for the past hour. The arena expected movement. The crowd leaned forward. Generals watching on broadcast feeds across the galaxy held their breath. Every sensor in the neutral station registered the starting tone and began recording. Viola Sorvin lowered all 4 of her weapons, not to a resting position, not to a carrying position. She lowered them completely, set them down on the arena floor, one by one, with deliberate and unhurried movements. The sound of each weapon touching the ground was very loud in the silence of the room, not in cheering, in pure, unfiltered shock. Voices from 17 different species filled the arena at once, a wall of sound that was impossible to separate into individual words. The Sovereignty General was on his feet. Several ambassadors were talking rapidly into communication devices. The timekeeper stood frozen at his podium, staring at the arena floor with his mouth slightly open. His procedure cards completely useless now. Dara had not moved from her mark. She stood very still, watching Vela, her expression careful and unreadable. Viola straightened to her full height, 7 feet of the galaxy's most decorated warrior, standing in the middle of an arena with no weapons in her hands, in front of a crowd of thousands and a broadcast audience of millions. She walked forward slowly, walking the way someone walks when they have made a decision and are simply moving toward it. She stopped a few feet from Dara, close enough to speak without raising her voice. "I have fought in 11 wars, Viola said. Her voice was quiet. The translator carried it clearly through the noise of the crowd. "I have stood in arenas on 9 different worlds. I have faced opponents larger than you, faster than you, better armed than you. I have never once hesitated before the signal." She looked down at Dara steadily. "But I have never, in all of that," she said, "faced an opponent who spent an hour telling me exactly why they were worth respecting. And then stood on their mark with shaking hands and faced me anyway." Dara said nothing. "Your people scare me," Viola said. The words came out clean and direct, with no performance in them. "Not because of your weapons, not because of your numbers or your technology or your military history, because you are the only species I've ever encountered that looks directly at everything that could go wrong, and then does the thing anyway. Not because you are not afraid. I've spent my entire life believing that strength was the absence of fear, that the best warriors were the ones who felt nothing before a fight." Her gold eyes stayed on. "You have just shown me, in front of everyone watching, that the bravest thing I have seen in 11 wars is a human woman standing on a mark with trembling hands." The crowd noise had settled into something lower. People were still talking, but more quietly now. "Now you know who we are," she said simply. Viola held her gaze for a long moment. Then she did something that no record in sovereignty history had ever documented her doing before. She extended one of her hands forward. The gesture was universal across most of the known galaxy. It meant the same thing in every language and every culture that used it. It meant, "I see you. We are not enemies here." Dara looked at the hand for just a second. Then she reached up and placed her own hand in it. The handshake lasted 3 seconds. It ended a 3-year war. Within 6 hours, the sovereignty fleet had begun standing down. Communication channels that had been silent or hostile for years opened up one by one. The first joint diplomatic session was scheduled before the day was over. Analysts and historians would spend years trying to understand exactly how it happened. How a conflict that had consumed resources and lives on both sides for 3 years came to a complete stop inside a single afternoon. The official records listed the cause as the Duel of Declarations. Resolved without combat. Champion Osei of the Terran Coalition declared victor by default. The timekeeper standing frozen at his podium knew that was not quite right. It had not ended because of a default ruling. It had ended because a warrior who had never lost in 11 wars walked into an arena expecting to fight a small, unremarkable human, and instead found something she had been looking for her entire life without knowing it. Proof that the thing she had always believed was weakness was actually the rarest and most honest form of strength she had ever seen. Viola Sorvin returned to the Sovereignty Fleet that evening. She did not speak to the press. She did not give interviews. She did not explain her decision to the generals who were waiting with questions and formal inquiries and long lists of procedural concerns. She sat alone in her quarters for a long time. On the small desk in front of her, she had written one line, in her own language, in her own handwriting, on a plain piece of paper. It said, "They are afraid. They do it anyway." She folded the paper carefully and kept it. Somewhere on the other side of the neutral zone, in the Terran Coalition fleet, Captain Dara Osei sat in her own quarters. The old data chip was on the desk in front of her. She was looking at it quietly, not quite smiling, not quite not smiling. Her hands had finally stopped trembling.